Welcome to episode 2 of our new channel podcast, Can You Hear It? Specifically referring to features and tools inside Apple's Logic Pro. We're going to be looking at some more things tonight, talking about them, and doing a bunch of listening. I think this is a format that I really like because not only is it a chance for us to talk about the features of Logic, but it's a chance to get better at this thing that we do, audio production. And one of the best ways to get better at it is by listening and learning how to listen. And so that's what this is all about. If you like this kind of content and like the other videos we do on this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Please do, because it brings you information about when we're going to be streaming and a lot of the other series that we're currently doing. But also, if you're interested in more, we do bonus streams. We're going to be doing our next members-only bonus stream next week. And we've got some really good stuff planned for that. And of course, as always, if you're looking for some more one-on-one training, there's always links in the description about that. So, what I'm going to be doing is finally working on finishing a song that I've been working on for quite a while. I've let it sit now because I've been thinking how this is going to fit in this album that I'm working on. And I think I finally have figured out a few different elements that are important with this. We're going to be looking at this song tonight. This started off as a songwriting experiment on this channel, and it came together, and I've used it a few times in a few different videos. Let me play just the beginning of it for you, and then we'll talk about what we're going to be doing for our listening experiments tonight. So I'm not showing you anything yet. Just use your ears. You turned around to see me there. I turned around to see the things I never had. I feel the changes everywhere in the air. You feel the change and look so sad. And look so sad. Time is the warrior on the battlefield of life. You bring them to their shaking knees. We find our common ground in the trenches too. You bring me joy and to my knees. And now I know that this is real enough for me. But okay, that's the beginning, first section. I want you to think back at what you just heard. If you're watching this live, then put it in the chat. If you're watching this after the fact, then put it in the comments. What can you tell me about the acoustic guitar that's playing in that track? Just based off of your memory. You didn't know what question I was going to ask, but what can you tell me about that acoustic guitar? What elements are there? What do you think the source material is? I think it has some really key identifiers. I think that there's some parts to that which will not be surprising to some of you. But what is it that you're hearing? I'll give you just a moment as you're doing that. This song, while you're thinking about the acoustic guitar, this song, of course, was inspired by some very specific genres of music. You can probably tell some of my influences based on the songwriting of this. This was a song that started with drums, and eventually I took them all off. And there's no drum kit on this. There is some timpani that happens later. And that's the only, I think, real percussion of the whole song, which is really unusual for anything that I'm doing. I like the challenge of making a song that has no percussion. So what can you tell me about that acoustic guitar? Let me play a little bit at the beginning now that maybe you're thinking about and trying to remember. I'll play the very beginning again. Listen close to what's happening with just the acoustic guitar when it comes in. You turned around to see me there. I turned around to see the things I never had. I feel the changes everywhere in the air. Okay, let me switch over screens. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that guitar sound. It's almost essentially unchanged through the whole song. There are, in the chorus parts, some things that happen. Let me actually load it up here in a second. Albert in the comments says, I hear a reverb, a chorus, a flanger. Certainly there's a reverb. And we'll actually be talking about the reverb in just a second. I don't want to give too much away. But let me pull open what this instrument is. Okay, here we go. So now you're looking at the instrument. It's one of the sampled instruments in Logic. When I play it like a piano, it sounds very much like a fake guitar. Primarily because when you play things like they're a piano, you can't just always play an instrument with a keyboard and expect it to sound anything more than just a keyboard that sounds like a guitar. So when you sequence out some of these instruments, one of the first things you have to do, if you even want to hope to make it sound in the same realm as the original, you want to make sure you're voicing it out the same way the strings on a guitar would play. But this is the main instrument. It's based in the sampler. It is a decent sounding instrument, but I think anytime I hear this song, I immediately think it's a MIDI style guitar. Then there's two effects on it. Really, we have, first of all, a compressor. And I don't think it's doing very much. I think it's actually barely doing anything, if anything at all. That one's not engaging. And the channel EQ has a boost of 2.7 decibels at 1,490 hertz. We have a cut of 5.2 decibels at 280, and then we have a 24 dB per octave high pass filter at 67 hertz. So those are the two effects on there. A compressor that's not really engaging much, it's just there, that equalizer, and then the reverb. And that's what I want to focus on for just a minute. To see what you think about the reverb. And John the Bomb says, depends on how someone strums or picks the guitar, though. And I think that's so true. One of the main things that would make me hire a guitar player in almost every case is the ability for the guitar player to be so versatile in the styles that they're performing, which means I can say to them, play it different, and they can do it. Pretty, not maybe easily, years of training and development of skills, but they're able to take some of that feedback and instantly adjust into some other style. Whereas something like a sampler is 90% of the time stuck exactly how it is. We can change some things. We can change a little bit of the attack. We can add some effects. We could change the velocity range so it triggers different samples. But for the most part, we're really rigid. And so either it works or we find a different instrument that could work. Let's switch back over. I want you to listen and tell me as much as you can about the reverb to this. I'm actually going to solo out this guitar part for a minute. And actually, I'm not going to solo it out. I'm just going to mute the vocals, which can be distracting to what I want to do here. So listen to the type of reverb. See if you can tell me without, rewinding and looking. It wouldn't even really tell you very clearly, but look or listen to the reverb that's playing and see what you can tell me about it. Back at the beginning of the song. I actually really like that key part. That was one of those key parts that I played in, and I remember thinking, it's like I improvised the part and didn't look back. Never had to make a change to it. I don't even know if I did any quantization. I'm trying to look. Looks like some parts are quantized, but this next part, I just really like that part. You'll notice the keys have no reverb on them. The guitar, though, does. Thanks for watching Sound Production Advice. I know it's late. You'll catch the rebroadcast. And then I push stop and you can hear the tail a little bit. So how would you describe it? What words would you actually use when you think about that reverb? Is it a big reverb? Is it a small reverb? Is it a big reverb with a short decay? Is it a smaller reverb with a longer decay? What words actually come to mind? And that's what I want you to think about a little bit, just for a second. I'm going to play it again because sometimes when I ask focusing questions, it becomes important to hear it. And then it goes out a little bit. Let me fast forward to chorus. It really doesn't hold up even as nicely when I go into that range. It sounds more and more like a keyboard. However, with everything else going on in that section, I think it fits still. But it's really the other instruments, I think, that carry it at that point. The reverb. So it does have kind of an interesting effect on it. When I hit stop on the transport, it doesn't really carry out too far. Let me switch over to the screen. You'll see I'm using Chromaverb. And this is the same reverb that the voice is going to, that this guitar is going to, the timpani is going to, the strings are going to, and whatever instrument that is, that's looks like brass. And so some brass are going to it as well. And there's a piano that's not going to it. There's the bass isn't going to it. There's some plucky sounds that are not going to it. So it's kind of a mixture. I'm not using a ton of different reverbs on this. I wanted to keep it relatively simple. In fact, the key part, this key part right here, it was originally going to it. It's just turned off. And I'm sure that's because at some point I thought it sounded too muddy. And so that's what I'm always fighting with this, is making it balance between clarity, adding space, and then simplicity at the same time. So this is that key part with the reverb on it. So there's like kind of like this little slappy part to it, which was emphasized in that reverb that I didn't like. Let's make sure I turn it back off. And then I was listening to it and thought, those two instruments actually sound really nicely blended, with one of them being in the reverb and one of them not. You almost can't even tell the keys aren't in the reverb, but it's cutting through a little bit better because of it. On the main page of Chromoverm, we have dampening EQ. This is different than just having the EQ page, the output EQ, which also has a low pass filter engaged. This low pass filter it's a 6 dB per octave at 10,000 cycles with a Q of 0.71. So it's not, definitely goes down eventually, but it's more of a gentle reduction of super high frequencies. And typically I would also do this with low frequencies if I have a reverb that is sustaining over a long period of time. The thing about this is we have a 1.6 second decay, and I'm dampening down various frequencies on this first page. We have, let's see, the first one is at 300 hertz, a ratio of 1.4 to 1, I'm assuming, with a Q of 1. And so that's going up. And then we're doing, with the high frequencies, at 2300 hertz, a ratio of 0.7 with a Q of 0.75. So, it's a little steeper and it's going down, or less steep. But the curve looks like it's boosting at the lows and going down at the highs, but because it's a dampening thing, let me do something here. Let me save this as, in terms of presets, and so I can always get back to the original. And let me play this a little bit. And one nice trick in Logic is that I can solo the reverb track and just hear the reverb without having to listen to anything else. So I'm soloing the Chromoverb track, aux 17, and we'll just hear the reverb. And I just boosted up the dampening and the high frequencies, and you'll hear it sustains longer now in those frequencies. If I pull it way down, it's like they clamp down really close. And so it's a little bit different flavor with the two of these, but we're trying to keep more of the high frequencies out of this, partially because the vocals are a little bit sibilant. And so I didn't want to enhance the sibilance even further with the reverb. I wanted to have more of a mid-rangey thing, but I do have the low frequencies boosted in the dampening, so the low frequencies ring out a little longer. And it may be more than I even want, except this is such a simplistic song in some ways. There's not that many tracks, not that many things happening, and so I'm allowing this to kind of be a low frequency drone at the same time. Let me go back to that preset so I get my settings back. And there's definitely a little bit with that slap that we were hearing with the keys that I might want to adjust some of these settings just so that we don't have quite as much of that weird slap. First of all, it looks like I intentionally, there's no way that this preset is a low quality one. Let's try it on the Ultra first.
Change and look so sad, Time is the warrior, on the battlefield.
Okay, interesting. So there have definitely been times when using Chromaverb that I like to experiment with a quality setting. Sometimes doing low or high, just depending on this. I think I'm going to still leave it how it was, being at the low quality, because I've gotten used to how it sounds. I think there's a little bit that may sound a little bit cleaner in some of those parts, but again, clean and pretty and pristine aren't always things that we're looking for. And so I think that there are some different parts to that. Okay, let's go back to the studio pick, camera 1, and let's talk a little bit about mastering this. There was a part of me that was wanting to talk about the sibilance in the vocals. I've definitely worked on that a little bit of late, and I think that they're actually getting to a place. I'm bussing those and doing a de-esser. I'm just not using the Logic de-esser. And so I'm really focusing on keeping these listening streams more about the default Logic toolkit. And so that's why we're not going to talk about those. I've definitely gone back and forth. But I do want to talk about some mastering, because a song like this is interesting without the drums. And I'll go ahead and play some of the more complex part of the song here. Let's go to the chorus that's right before the bridge into the next chorus, which has an increasingly complex arrangement. We start with that guitar patch, the keys, we add a bass, there's a second guitar part, there's a synthesizer that gets added, there's some timpani that get added, and for the most part, that's the same until more than halfway through the song. At that point, we've still got the synth, but we've added some brass, and then we add a full orchestra of sounds. And so that's the part we're going to listen to for a second. And I want you to think about what types of mastering things we'd want to do for this, knowing right this moment, all we have is one limiter on the entire track. That's the only thing mastering-wise I've done.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now?
Headed northeast towards 275. Will Fleet Creek, house exploded. 460. Creek and Plainfield is a shamble. 962, go ahead. This whole neighborhood, Hutchison Road has been wiped out. Houses leveled, wires, poles, and power down. You better send everything you can get over here. Everything we got you rolling 962.
Hamilton County, Elmwood Preschools. This is a disaster area. Disaster area. There are license ready and we need help.
They also have the same problem, Elmwood. We're trying to see what we can do for you. Civil defense. The City of Elmwood is requesting all possible assistance that can be rendered.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now? And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to truth. And now
Okay, so mastering. That's the question. What did you hear in what we were just listening to that might give you some worries about the mastering? Which parts of that section of the song are working well? Which parts aren't working well? Those are the questions I want to focus on for a minute. Listening to what you just heard, how are the low frequencies? How are the high frequencies? In terms of the mid-range, is it working right now? Do you have enough clarity? Do you think it's at approximately the right level? How do you even know what the right level is? What do you think? And I'm carrying on a side conversation in the chat as well with Sheriff Vlogs, about the Atmos and Apple really trying to convert everybody over to it, which I have no doubt parts of that are true. I think that Apple is really pushing hard for spatial audio to take off. But in terms of suppressing people's music who aren't in spatial audio, I'm not convinced that that's immediately happening or not. If that is the case, if that really is happening, then I mean it's their platform. I mean I don't really care either way. And yet that'll be for another Can You Hear It podcast. I don't think I'm going to necessarily change my whole approach and start making everything spatial audio at the same time. But I don't necessarily doubt it. Let's talk about the mastering for a second. I do have one limiter on this, and it's not a Logic plugin, but I'm going to switch it at some point here. But I'm just going to leave it on for the moment because it was the one I was using. I want to talk about mastering and some of the plugins that could do equivalent things. Let me show you what I've got on there right now, which is the L1 from Waves. Waves are a good friend these days. And this plugin I put on here long before Waves tried to do their subscription model. It's like, I hate even thinking about that whole fiasco that just happened, but here it is. This is the plugin I'm using. And you'll see on my chain here, I've got that. Then I've got the NX Ocean Way Nashville Studio, which I was using just to do a cross-reference, but those are deactivated, and then I usually gain it down afterwards because that adds a little bit. I have a loudness meter right here, and then I've got Clarity, which I don't know if you know what Clarity is. This is not a plugin that changes the sound. It's just a metering tool. This goes on your channel strip, and then let me turn on my camera here, my external camera. It goes out to this hardware unit, And this is where I do most of my hardcore metering. And so you can see right this moment, I don't know if you can really see or not. The program loudness is minus 14.4 LUFS. My target, which I set down there, is minus 14. And everything else just tells me what's happening there. And it gives me my loudness max, my loudness range, my peak to loudness, my true peak max, and program loudness. So this is like my best friend in terms of all my metering. And yet I've done lots with just the default LUFS meter inside Logic, this one right here. And so that's the one we're going to look at for a second, even though I wanted you to know that I've got this other one that's constantly cranking out. The LUFS meter, the loudness meter in Logic is adequate for most things. What I do is I'll set this yellow line at minus 14 as my reference, and so I'll see what's going above there. It doesn't give me as easily some of the peak information because it's a mixture of the LUFS and the true peak. Those are two of the main things that we're looking at for like a Spotify release. And so, that I'm going to be looking at in different ways, but I want to make sure at least that I'm hovering around minus 14. So let's go back a little bit to that louder section. Back here.
And now I know that this is real. This is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now?
All possible assistance that can be rendered.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for you.
So I'm hovering right in the right place in terms of the LUFS. I could probably have a louder true peak max in terms of some of the content, which means I'm locking it down, perhaps some of those peaks even more than I need to. But it's pretty close. I think in terms of the leveling, I'm pretty good. I don't think that I've really overreached or underreached. I think if I put this song out there as it is with the dynamic range it has and the overall loudness, that most of the platforms are going to do a little bit, but minimal. I don't think it's going to wreck the sound, for instance. And hey, Jim, I love your star. Just saying. And so, we could use this tool. I could also put on the multimeter, which gives us a lot of information in terms of that. We do have, in terms of the level, the peak and RMS, which is the average or root mean square. This stuff does have all the information. It's just sometimes you have to understand how to read these and how to figure that out. Also has a correlation meter and a phase, or the correlation meter in the graphical format. It has pretty much everything, including the option to do true peak and true peak plus RMS. And so you could be using this tool instead of something fancy like my TC Electronic. I just like having my TC Electronic on all the time and working. So that way I can just look over and be like, oh, it's been tracking what I'm doing. It's it does like a longer memory, I would say, which we could do infinite for the peak here, but then every once in a while we're still going to have to like clear it with the reset button.
But is this real enough for now? And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true.
And I will say the true peak at minus 5.1 is measuring exactly the same, which thank goodness it is. Otherwise, I would say something's broken, right? I will say the LUFS here, minus 14.2, is 0.5 different than on the TC Electronic. And so I'd have to reset both and restart both and figure out exactly what's happening. But this tool, this multimeter, is really useful. Now, we did have a comment from Jim saying maybe try and give the vocals some space in the EQ at certain parts, which I don't know if I don't know if I disagree with. There could be some sculpting that would take place. Here's my personal strategy for mastering. And Jim, I trust anybody's view when they say something, by the way, because I think the instincts of somebody who listens to music are generally right on, even more so than when they think they know what they're doing. The people who think that they know everything are the ones I'm more worried about than the ones who instinctually can give answers. But I probably will do very little in terms of different plugins on the mastering chain. I would say right this moment, I've got 4 that are turned on. One of them is doing something. The other 3 are just meter tools, right? So they're not doing anything. I don't think this mix sounds horrible at this moment. And that's because every time I've gone to think about the master and I make a change, I think, okay, I need to work on the bass a little bit. The bass is not fitting here. Should I do this at the mastering stage on the stereo out? Or is this something that I should go back to the original bass part and make some changes? And I always go towards that second option. If I think, man, this master, there's a little bit of clarity issue with the voice, or there's a little bit like that keyboard part doesn't fit quite right. What can I put on my mastering channel to fix this? Then I'm doing something that I think is wrong. Personally, that's not wrong for everybody. I go back and I fix it in the mix. I go back to the actual track and actually work on it. For me, the L1 on my master track is more about really giving it kind of that cohesive sound. I think the L1 Ultra Maximizers, the 2, the 3, whatever, all do this better than most things. And I like the aesthetic that's given by the L series on my tracks, but it's not there just to like, squish the turd out of my whole mix. That's not why I'm using it, although it does that to a certain degree, but I really like how it brings things together in a certain way. Outside of that, if I see someone putting like a really massive equalizer on their master, or I see someone, having to put like some sort of warming effect or distortion thing, or even a little bit of reverb, I'm like, hold on, like, why are you doing it there? Why are you putting something like an equalizer if you want to bring out the voice on your master track, when if you boost a little bit, it's going to boost everything in that range. And it's not going to really give you what you want. Instead, if you find that you don't have the right amount of like vocal clarity, let's figure out what's happening with the other instruments. Let's go back for a minute. I'll give you an example. This keyboard is one that I've always worried about with the vocals. in certain parts, it's in the exact range. And I boosted it up quite a bit. So if I really wanted to do something, I could put this a little bit further out and I could pull out a section kind of in the diction area of voice. So I'm pulling down just over 2K and I'm scooping out some of the part where the voice might be, right? So instead of boosting up the voice as an EQ choice in the mastering channel, I come through and I'm like, let's scoop out a little bit of some of the other areas on the instruments that might be competing. And then we end up with a mix where perhaps the voice can actually cut through a little bit more.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true.
And here as well with this brass part, these horns, I do have the spread EQ, which is going to move it out of the way for the most part from the voice. But afterwards, I could also do a similar thing where I just scoop just a little bit, but then I can still boost up above it if I want.
Now I know that this is all that. And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you?
And I will say this, outside of the songwriting part of my process, I rarely ever EQ anything on a soloed track. That's not how EQ and listening and music work. None of them work that way. What I mean is, if you're soloing on a track and then EQing it, you've all of a sudden started listening to that instrument in a vacuum, and you're no longer actually making a decision based on anything except for that instrument by itself. If I'm going to EQ the brass, I'm going to listen to it with the whole thing and actually, turn it on or off, but in the context of the whole mix. Because if it brings a little bit more clarity to the other things when I turn it on, then great, it's in the right direction. If at some point it no longer sounds like it's a cohesive part of the mix, I've done too much. And so always, when you're doing these A/B things, do that in the context of instruments all put together. Let's do another listening thing for a minute while we're on this topic. I'm going to make a change to one of the instruments, another one in the vocal range, or one that I've already done. I'm not going to tell you. And so I want you to listen and see just if you can tell me which thing I just changed based on what we've been listening to. And then after I play this one section one time through, I'm going to A/B it a couple times by turning on this EQ. I've just made the change. You can't see it, obviously. But let's see if you can tell what I did.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now?
Okay, so this time, every couple bars, I'm going to turn off this change I made, and I'll raise my hand. I'll say, okay, change is made, and then another few bars, I'll make the change and reactivate it. Okay, so here's playing again with it engaged at first, and then a few bars in, I'll turn it off.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now but is this real enough for now? And now I know that this is real enough for me, but it.
Could you tell what change I was making? It was pretty subtle, but it was still, let's see, about 7 decibels of a frequency on one of the instruments. I personally think actually I'm going to leave it because it cleaned up a little bit more of the vocals. Any idea? Take your best shot in the dark, I guess. Which instrument do you think I was EQing, pulling out 7 decibels with a 0.57 Q setting, which is fairly, it's not massively wide, but it's decent. I'll give you another 10 seconds to think about it. If you can't hear this kind of stuff, there's a number of factors. One of them is YouTube. You know, live streams, it's not completely uncompressed audio. So there's some issues with that a little bit. Also, it's a mix that I know really well that you're just hearing maybe for one of the first times or listening to it critically for one of the first times. And so it's brand new. Also, you might never have listened to things this way. You might never have actually listened to the sounds of subtle changes on equalization like this. And so it could be like a brand new skill. I feel like one of these Can You Hear It series videos should be all EQ based. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a note and do that for the next one next week. All EQ all hour long because I think that there's a lot to that. Okay, so let me show you what I did with this one, and then you can see if seeing it actually helps you at all. David says horn, and I did not do the horn. No Destination Really says bass was dipped a bit, and that, nope, not this case. Both of those are like, I really am super happy that you're guessing. It just goes to show how much like one change can ripple through the other thing. Let me play it again for David, who's asking. I'll start with it turned off. This was the original. And then when I raise my hand, it's when I'm turning on this new cut.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that.
Okay, David, you're a god among men because it is the guitar. Good. With the right focus and listening critically, you can definitely hear some of those things. So let me put this on the screen. I was making this change right here, which is actually a significant change. And what you're hearing with that guitar is that it actually goes duller in some ways. I think it really does. Let's hear this at the beginning because this is the one thing I haven't listened to see if it actually works as a sound. It definitely works in those more thicker sections, but let me hear this. This is without it at the beginning.
You turned around to see me there. I turned around to see the things I never had.
Okay, let me do it with it now.
You turned around to see me there. I turned around to see the thing.
So I'm actually thinking that this is an example of something that I don't want to have engaged until right about here. Because I think I like the guitar a little brighter at the beginning when things are stripped back. But the minute we get a little bit thicker, when we add that fourth vocal part, and we add some of the other instruments that we wanted to be more engaged there. So what I'm going to do is turn it off for the moment. And let's see. We're going to go into automation mode. And we'll go to channel EQ. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. I think we're on 3. Peak 3 on off. Says it's off. And so I'm going to turn it on at that point.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real?
So just that simple automation move of turning on that new band as things get thicker, I think makes a big deal. I'm also, because at the end here, it needs to cut through as things strip back down, I'm going to turn it back off in that last section.
Be rendered.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know.
I want to actually move it to that section right there because that's really where it goes. And David, you're saying, yeah, that sounds good. Not many people do that type of automation, but it can't or can. I think hopefully you meant can make a big difference. Because I totally agree if that's what you were saying. It can make a huge difference. And some of the best engineers I've ever worked with, they actually have all of these tricks like this. And they don't talk about them all the time. Because I think that it's like everyone has like their signature move, and it's like to them, they know that it's like a small thing, but it means so much in what their aesthetic is and how they operate. And so they do it because it brings them something, and I think it makes their mix better. But everybody has their own little set of tools that they're using, own little set of things, the way that they mix, the way that they check levels, the way that they automate certain things. It's like I'm leaving the reverb on all the time on this because I think my vocals are pretty much kind of in the same slot all the way through. But there are so many people that would be like, you know what? I want like a little longer reverb that's at the end of phrases. And I'm going to automate it down until we get to the end so it doesn't muddy up the whole thing. But at the end of the phrase, it makes it sound like maybe it's been there the whole time. It's like all of these things, these little tiny things are what make mixes magical and what make everything fit together. The problem that I see too often are people who think my mix is decent. Let's get it mastered so it can sound great. And in reality, what the goal should be is to make your mix. It's like I always try to make every mix the perfect mix. I've never done it, but I try to make every mix so that when somebody goes to do the final stage of something, that they have to do very little. Surprisingly little. And actually, at that point, somebody who's mastering it or finishing it can actually do what I call the creative version of the process instead of the fix-it version of the process. So that they can go through and be like, oh, this sounds good. This song is in the genre of blah, blah, blah. And I think if I just boost it a little bit, it would actually make it in that genre like really shine in a way that maybe the songwriter, the mixer didn't think about doing. And so we end up with the mastering person, the finisher, being able to actually be creative in what they're doing instead of just being like, oh my gosh, the low frequencies, or you made this way too loud, or it's like, what the heck is happening with all of your imaging? Or, stop expecting the mastering engineer to be a fixer. Instead, make your mix as perfect as you can, and let them do like their job creatively instead of, out of necessity in a way. Cool. I'm trying to think of what else I'm really been thinking about changing on this song. I think it's for me, it's getting to the point where I really am happy with it. I do want to hear a couple of the parts that I haven't listened to in a long time just to make sure they're okay. First of them is this piano thing at the top, which I don't even know what it sounds like because I haven't heard it. Oh, I remember this now. Talk about subtleties. That part, I mean, unless you're listening careful, probably didn't even know it was in there.
True. And now I know that this is real enough for life.
But it ties into this other phasing guitar plucks at towards the bottom. I think I did these around the same time. And listen to these if you're on headphones, because these two things are one of my favorite tricks in terms of panning. I'm putting both of these through binaural panners, which binaural panners are cool if you move them around to one place and then they don't actually, you lose the binaurality of them. That's not a word, I don't think. You have to automate them and move them a little bit so that the psychoacoustic principles of binaural audio actually allow your ears to move or to hear the location of them. If you just put them in the back, you'll never know. But if you put them in the back and then slightly move them around, your ears go like this. Ooh, something's there. Something's there. I'm going to do that section one more time because it's just... So if you're listening, I hope you could hear that it's moving around a little bit. This isn't something where your head tracking has to even be a part of it because it literally doesn't do anything with that. It's all reliant on having headphones on. Otherwise, it just sounds like it's moving a little bit. But I love the binaural stuff. I think it can be really cool. Jim, come back at some point and listen with headphones because I think you'll hear a little bit of that. I can't remember if I did this in the second section too or if I just did it in the first one. No, I did it. Okay. And then we add the brass there. So I've written a lot of stuff over the years for orchestral type settings. And this section for me, even though it wasn't orchestral instruments except for the brass and the timpani, this was like, for me, like thinking orchestrally, which I just love that part of it. I'm ignoring, those are timpani. I'm ignoring No Destination Really's comment about my vocals being more organic, not because I don't agree, but because in the album that this is going to go on, it is, I mean, I don't know how hokey or not this is, but it's about like a robot that's becoming more human. And so this is later in the progression. I'm doing this concept album. I did it before ChatGPT was ever announced. But I've always been interested in the metaphor of something getting emotions. And so the voice is highly processed because earlier on in the earlier songs, it's robotic in some ways. And this still ties into that aesthetic. It's just more human anyway. So that's why for this particular song, all the rest of my songs where I overuse autotune and EQ and compression, those are for other reasons. But here, this is that section. Now that you've heard all those individual pieces, here's how they all build together.
And now I know that this is real, that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now?
Fleet headed northeast towards 275. That's Willfleet and Creek. House exploded. 460. Creek and Plainfield is a shamble. 962, go ahead. This whole neighborhood, Hutchison Road, has been wiped out. Houses leveled, wires, poles, and power down. You better send everything you can get over here. Everything we got's rolling, 962.
Hamilton County, Elmwood Police Troops. This is a disaster area. There are license ready and they need help.
They also have the same problem, Elmwood. We're trying to see what we can do for you. Civil defense. The city of Elmwood is requesting all possible assistance that can be rendered.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this
So Node, or I'm going to start calling you NDR, is asking what the audio clip is. I pulled that off of archive.org. It's actually the recordings of emergency personnel after a series of tornadoes in the Midwestern part of the United States, which happened in 1978, which is the year I was born. So those are all storms that happened like when I was like 3 months old. So it ties back into the birth of this person who is singing. And I just thought it was kind of a nice tie-in to have that be from the year that I was born as well. So cool. NDR, we're the same age. Old men. I am 2 months older than you. And David, you're just a whole year older than us. See, this is what I love about YouTube and live streams. We're all like made from the same cloth. And we have a small group here tonight, but it's like, ooh, you're like almost exactly a year older than me. I'm not brave enough to tell you my actual birth date, so, but it was really close. February 98. Hold on, I'm just multitasking all of a sudden. I got people who are all just starting to wake up overseas, and they're all writing me messages. Any other questions about what we've been talking about? I'm trying to think if there's any other parts that I would do. Let me just, because we're talking about it a little bit, I'll show you my de-esser. This is my new favorite de-esser right this moment. I know there's even people keep on telling me, various ones that they love, but right now this SSL one is one that I really like. So I've got all of my tracks, vocal tracks, going into the SSL Native Vocal Strip 2, and I've got essentially the compressor working, not very much, but a little bit. And then the de-esser mostly is what it's doing. And then I actually am boosting just slightly, ironically, similar place. Now the de-esser is higher up. And then that one's just around diction to give it a little bit of space. Stefano, good morning. So Compander, they're just mixed compressor and expander together. And so they just called it a Compander. I don't know. I haven't seen too many other people do that particular thing. I have seen it a couple places. But I mean, I don't even think I've got my threshold down at all. And so it's not really doing very much. Just when it gets up to the loud parts, it can sometimes, when it's all being bust into one channel, that funneling can sometimes push it right up to the limit. I really am just using for this for the de-esser. So let me turn it on, off and on.
This real enough for you. And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you?
I don't know. I just put this on before the stream. I kind of almost think I'm doing a little too much because I just turned it off and I'm like, yes, there's more S's, but there's more air around it too.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now?
Yeah, I'm going to leave that off. Not off. I'm going to leave it lessened because I think I was doing too much and it really cut down on some of the airiness of the vocals, which I was liking. And I think that was part of why I ended up changing some of the other tracks and scooping out. But I like that it sounds, I think I was doing too much. Perfect example of listening. And it's important sometimes to do that A-B process.
And now I know that this is real enough for me. But is this real enough for you? Close enough to true. And now I know that this is real enough for life. But is this real enough for now?
Oh, that was exactly what this needs. I think I'm almost ready just to be like, it's done. I just had put a little too much on. I still want to pull them down a little bit, but I don't want them to be nearly as pulled down as they were. Okay, cool. And yes, Stefano, definitely a little bit of Pink Floyd vibes. Roger Waters is probably one of my top 5 in terms of favorite songwriters and performers. And you can hear on some of those early albums that like his voice being quirky like it is, but yet still so clear, and like the way that he enunciates and all of that stuff is just perfect for this style of music. And I think that's actually kind of interesting. And if that's a question, NDR, about it, is it biographical, then yeah, pretty much. I mean, it is in a way for sure. But also, I think almost all art is something that we experience and then translate into a form that other people can experience. And some of the greatest art is something that can be universally felt by other people. And so maybe our experience, we realize, is similar to what other people are going through. And then some of what I think is the most interesting art are the things that are so different from what we experience and can't relate to, and yet we get to look into a window of what somebody else is experiencing, and then we learn from that and maybe get a new perspective on something. And so I think that is like Pink Floyd, Roger Waters, so much of what he wrote and sang about, those were things that were really important to him. as he is described since. I'm not putting words into his mouth, but there was a few great documentary films, musical films that he's done in the last couple of years where he actually talks about so much of this stuff and why it's meaningful to him. And I think that's one of the things I like about it. It doesn't feel like somebody who just made up something and is trying to sing it. It's like you see some pop musicians who clearly have no idea what they're singing about. Not because they're not, I mean, I'm not judging like pop musicians and saying they're bad or something, but you see like somebody who's, like 16 and sings a song about like the worst breakup of their life. And you're like, oh my gosh, just wait a few years. The worst breakup of your life is coming. It's not happened, no matter how bad it was. And so, yeah, it's like if I could play guitar like anybody, it would be like David Gilmour. I mean, just the ability for lyrical solos and things. I actually thought that their voices, the juxtaposition like on the wall, was so intriguing because they weren't the same. They had such different characteristics. But it like they complement each other. And who knew that they were going to like essentially hate each other? It's like life. That's like a reflection of life, so much of what was in the music. And I hope that YouTube doesn't demonetize me for talking about Pink Floyd. Seems like something. There are some bands you really can't talk about. Music channels, they say, are some of the hardest ones to run on YouTube just because of all of the demonetization and copyright. And if you think about the wrong band, then they claim everything for their own. But that's why I do almost all my own music on this channel, because I, instead of trying to, skirt the rules with other people's, it's like you just do your own. And I used to, when I was younger, write songs endlessly. I've got so many in notebooks and all that stuff. And I got away from that as like an adult. I was still writing music for things like TV commercials. I've done some film scores. I'm working on a film score right now. I've done all this stuff. And I thought, you know what? It's like songwriting is something I want to do more of. I think it's an important thing for myself. So this channel has really become more of a way not only to teach Logic, but also to like continue to refine songwriting skills. And I agree with Stefano about Gilmour being underrated. I mean, there's both of those people sang from their souls. I don't have a doubt about that. I think they both really meant every word and thing that they did. NDR, you work in TV music? Cool. I do less now with TV music than I was a few years ago. But it's like I've done jingle work and other things for a bunch of commercials that aired regionally and even a few national ones a number of years ago for a couple of the big advertising companies here in Colorado. And I just, it's like at some point with my teaching and other stuff I'm doing, it's like I phase in and out of different parts of that, but I'm really getting more back into film music to a certain degree, more for fun than for work, because, with a teaching job like I have, that's the bread and butter. I don't have to always scramble for every little penny, which is super nice. I think teaching is a great avenue, and I hope that university system doesn't implode in the United States, but it might. You never know the way things are going. And Stefano says, I personally have healed myself from trauma growing up from songwriting. It's the best therapy. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that's really poignant in some ways. And everybody should have something that means something to them that heals them like that for sure. Well, I think it might be time to pull the plug on this latest series, latest video in the Can You Hear It series. These are fun. I'm having fun doing them, so we're going to keep doing one a week. Usually I'm trying to do them Wednesday nights, but this week was a little different on Wednesday night. So here we are on Friday night. I know. But I think that those of us who do this stuff, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed learning more about this song, but also practicing your ears. If you're joining us later in the stream, it may be worth going back because we talk about a few of the different elements, and we do the thing where I describe a little bit, but you don't get to see it, and then you get to actually use your ears to figure things out. So take those exercises seriously and really develop your ears, because that's so important. And Stefano, I'd love to hear some of your songs if you haven't posted somewhere. You can find my contact information on my page. If you haven't even posted, I'd love to hear some of them. It could be that what you're talking about is more something you've done internally for yourself, but it's like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think it's cool that you're sharing that here. And NDR, best Friday ever. I mean, I'm here having fun, so that's all that matters for me. Okay, thanks everybody. Let's pull the plug. Check back again. If you're not subscribed, make sure you do. If you're not a member of the channel, then you should be. It's a small price, and you get these kind of streams extra without anybody else fluffing it up. So you get to come and just be part of the tight group that we have for our bonus streams, which we're doing one this coming week. Anyway, talk to you later. Have a great weekend. Probably another stream in the next day or two.